Modelling, an urban take on the matter with Darren Shaw. I remember a long time ago when I was chilling out on the council estate block with my friends. I was only a teenager at the time, and I was involved in some activity that some these days might call sort of gang activity. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm sure I can do more with my life than this. I told my friends and all the people around me of the dreams that I hoped to make come true and the ambitions that I had in mind. And I'll never forget, they all laughed at me when I told them I wanted to be an event promoter one day and I wanted to be involved in the music game. Now, even earlier in life, when I was a tiny little boy, I remember asking myself, what's the difference that makes the difference? So, if I want to achieve something in life, what is the things that I need to be able to know in order to be able to do it, whatever it is? I remember being a young boy and seeing that my mother, who was an immigrant to England, to the United Kingdom, she was a Jamaican immigrant, you see. And I noticed that when my mother spoke in her Jamaican ways and when she behaved in her way that she used to behave always in her country, I remember thinking the things that she's achieving uh, are a certain thing in certain contexts, and the things that other people achieve when they speak in a different way and behave in a different way, they achieve a different outcome, a different result. And I remember thinking to myself as a child, how do I make sure that I don't obtain similar outcomes to my primary caregiver, my mother? How do I make sure that I achieve something different to what she's achieving? And what is the difference that is going to make the difference? That was when, and again, I was probably about 4, 5 years old, something really young like that. I remember thinking at that point in time, I need to study this, I need to understand this, and I need to know how to change and how to be different in different situations. Now, the day that changed it all is when I was 8 years old. When I was 8 years old, my mum, she was going through a phase in her life of very serious mental health issues, and she left me on the streets. She left me outside a train station in a place called Brixton in London, where the police found me walking around as a little boy. And that was the day that changed it all. That was the day when I was in so much shock and confusion that every single piece of information coming into me, into my ears and my eyes and my senses, every single piece of information that came into me was something that I needed to process and try to work out how it is I need to survive. I needed to take in all information consciously and unconsciously in order to figure out how to live in the new world that had going to be created for me. Especially now I was growing up after this point in time. I grew up in a whole new context. And again, I was only 8 years old. What I learned in the new context that I lived in when I was growing up in a form of care is my old ways, my old map of reality does not work. And many ways of my behavior, many of my what I call in NLP my totes, testing, operating, testing, exit, testing, operate, testing, exit, many of my ways of cycling around different behaviors to try and work out what's going to work for me just weren't working. Me trying to be me and this new situation was not working. And that's when I decided I needed to go into a state which in NLP we refer to as the know nothing state. It's a state in which you know that you know nothing. You know that you know nothing, so you take in all information because you don't know what's relevant and you don't know what's relevant. You take in all information so that you can start to learn to become whoever and whatever it is you need to learn to become. I'll never forget my an old lesson that my mum used to say to me when I was with her. One thing that did work is she used to always say to me, "Learn to talk English proper. Make sure you get your education." So that's the one thing that I knew in this context that I held dear and I held to be true. Learn to talk English properly and get your education. And I was always remembering that I was always told never to forget who I truly am. That was a lesson that was given to me early, which did help me in my new context. But again, this was a point in time when I was learning about modeling. I had to model the environment around me and create this new map of reality in my mind. And I had to model behaviors around me to see who survives well in this environment and who doesn't, because I need to copy the people who survive. So I need to become more of them in order to become closer to what it is I need to be, which is a survivor, which is somebody who's successful and does okay in life. Now, when I was about 16 years old, I returned to the place where I grew up before the age of 8. It was a very black urban environment. Again, it was a black area called Streatham in London. And had many Jamaicans around me and people of Nigerian and Ghanaian descent. So I was very African and Caribbean, predominantly Caribbean in my particular environment. The attitudes in that context and that way of living life, the behaviors, the values, the beliefs, the capabilities, the identity that you needed, your spiritual sense of who you are and your purpose with the rest of the world in the original context which I came from was different. And this is when I learned again that when you change from one context to another context, you need to switch. You need to switch who you are in terms of how you behave and how you act in different situations in order to succeed. I got into fights. I experienced some torture. I had some near death experiences where, my gosh, if I didn't survive those situations, then I wouldn't be here able to tell you certain stories now. I might tell you those someday. I started learning about criminality psychology. I started studying the people around me and learning how to think like a criminal because it was the best way to survive in that context. I joined the gang, and that's when I started to chill on the block with the mandem. Later on in life, not too much long later, I discovered neurolinguistic programming. Discovered neurolinguistic programming. It was some book that I read called Successful Selling with NLP by John Seymour and Robin Pryor. An amazing, amazing book. If I've got the title and the authors right, it might not be John Seymour. I just need to double check that one. But anyway, it was called Successful Selling with NLP. And I remember when I found this book, I was just like, whoa, what's this? What's this? What's this? And the more I read, the more I began to realize that it was possible to sell and it was possible to communicate with other people in a way that helped them to come to decisions about things that they wanted to buy, even if it cost a lot of money. And I remember thinking at that point in time, I need to look more into this neurolinguistic programming stuff because that seemed well interesting. Later on, after discovering this book, I found drum and bass music and rave culture, brand new territory again. And based on the lessons that I'd learned early in life, new territory, work out the environment around you, model the environment, learn from the people who are successful so that you can do more of what it is they do. I sought out exemplars. I found people who were good. I found people who were good at what they did so I could learn from them. Event organizers, people who organized event for over 1,000 attendees, people who had performance confidence and charisma, people who could step onto stages with pure confidence and be like, hey. I needed to learn from these people in order to learn how to survive within the drum and bass context so I could do well myself. I think I did all right with that. Then later on, whilst doing the rave culture thing, I stepped out for a little while and I went to university. Again, a new context, and I thought I'd apply this model that I've got of surviving new contexts, using new behaviours and modelling really quickly and learning really quickly. At university, I was told by somebody in the psychology department that NLP, neurolinguistic programming, was banned, so I couldn't use it. So what I did instead is I stepped into something called cognitive experimental psychopathology, which is basically cognitive. Basically means the inner workings of the mind. Experimental means always doing experiments to work out how things work. And psychopathology is basically the study of emotions and emotional disorders, psychopathology. Then in 2018 and 2019, I was invited 2 years in a row to speak at the NLP conference in the UK on the subject of modeling and the subject of transferable skills with neurolinguistic programming. Because by this point, I started realizing that what I enjoy doing the most is teaching, talking, and also hoping to inspire interest in the discipline of neurolinguistic programming. I also found it to be a really great foundation for creating content based on what I've already learned, and that's what I wanted to do, and that's what I've been doing ever since moving forward. Now, it reminds me of when I was younger, just a teenager, and people saying to me, "What do you want to do with your life?" And me saying, "I want to be a promoter someday." I achieved way more than that. And one of the lessons that I've learned much later in life is you don't need external validation to be motivated to do things. You don't need people outside you to say things to you that allows you to go forward in life. What you do need is to be able to choose your role models, choose your exemplars, choose the people that you're going to copy, model, and learn from them. Learn from people who are surviving well so that you can start to begin to learn to survive well by yourself. I also learned that the past doesn't need to define what you can do in the future. Again, if I stayed with the old beliefs of when I was a child or when I was on the streets or whatever it might be, if I stayed with those old beliefs, I wouldn't be doing a lot of what I do now. Thank you very much. My name is Darren Shaw. I want to say a massive thank you to Neil Ormond, John Seymour, Michael Perez, James Tripp, Alan Whitten, Judith Lowe, and all at ANLP, Karen, Gemma, Cash, Daksha, Malik, and my father. Rest in peace.